Ah, yes, A Nightmare on Elm Street, one of the most iconic and beloved horror franchises of all time, with a passionate, devoted fan base. It's been years since the latest theatrical film, and rumors the last few years about some sort of legacy sequel to the original. Jason Blum from Blumhouse has said on multiple occasions not only did he want Robert Englund to return as Freddy Krueger one more time, but that he could in fact convince him, but wanted to get the Exorcist remake out of the way first. What's about to release, I wonder? That's just me hoping once this strike is over we get some sort of an announcement. Englund, however, has stated he felt he was too old to physically play the part and wanted the role to be recast, and was excited to see how today's visual effects could create some unexplored concepts. Some fans want an animated series with Englund returning to voice Freddy, some would like the franchise to stay dead. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, as well as your ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. This is a place to talk about the things we love. We can disagree without giving each other nightmares. It should be noted, I grew up watching the original, but only a few of the sequels did I choose to rewatch over the years, but all of them have been binged recently for this ranking. Coming in last place is the remake. I really don't even count this as a Nightmare on Elm Street film, despite the fact that, unfortunately, it is. I know some people are crazy hard on it and call it the worst film ever made, and because for the most part it stays pretty close to the original script-wise, so I can't say it's a terrible script, it just makes terrible unnecessary changes to Freddy's backstory, his motivations, your perspective on him, and the movie itself. And unfortunately, it's not all that pleasant to watch, especially with cheap-looking visual effects shots, replacing the original creative, practical effects from the original classic. This film really doesn't do much right for me. The micro-dreams thing is a neat idea, and Jackie Earle Haley could have been a great Freddy in maybe another movie, but as long as Robert Englund is alive, there's only one Freddy. Coming in at number 8 is Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. This one just went way too cartoony for me, personally. And if the jokes and the kills or the acting or hell, any of it was so laughably bad that it wrapped all the way around to being good again, I could laugh at how bad it is, or if I got a kick out of just how cartoony Freddy is in this movie, then maybe I could get a lot of enjoyment out of this incarnation of the character. But for me, it just never quite gets there. Freddy playing video games or being the witch from Wizard of Oz or even acting like Bugs Bunny, I just couldn't do it. You are introducing new characters in the final film, giving me a sliver of hope for a new take, a new direction after Dream Child, and a better direction, and unfortunately this wasn't it. The kills were lame, and honestly, I'm good not rewatching this anytime soon. Coming in at number 7 is Nightmare on Elm Street 5: Dream Child. I didn't mind when they were hinting at the nun character in Dream Warriors, but 5 films in, and we are now deciding to dive into Freddy's backstory while also being super humorous too. Too wacky, the kills are gross, with maybe one of them making me chuckle, but honestly this movie is kind of a blur with all the characters being one note and very thin. The Super Freddy scene is horrendously awful, and I'm a comic book fan and a horror fan, so that should have hit all the right notes from me. Alice gets a whole movie to shine as the main character, so I think she's better here than before, but the idea of a baby's dream is actually pretty interesting, but it never really goes anywhere. It was never scary, and it was never funny. I don't care about really any of these characters all that much, and Freddy as a menacing figure is just declining sequel after sequel for me. Coming in at number 6 is A Nightmare on Elm Street 4: Dream Master. I know some people love this film, and I don't hate it, but for me it reminds me of Halloween 5. It's a step down from its predecessor in almost every way. Alice I find to be a less interesting character than Kristen, and Alice's friends in this aren't much more interesting or likable than in Dream Child, honestly, and they're just slightly less annoying and maybe made me chuckle a few times. You also have some recasting in here that I just felt was a miscast cast for this particular franchise. The kills are still solid for the most part, although wacky at times. Freddy's a little too silly and the kills aren't really scary. But this is where the franchise starts to add more visual effects that starts to bug me, but not nearly as bad as in Dream Child or Final Nightmare. Coming in at number 5, and honestly all the films on up I am a big fan of, but coming in at number 5 simply because I've really just watched it the least out of the rest is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddys Revenge. When I first saw this as a kid, I liked it, but remember not liking it as much as the original. When rewatching it for this ranking, kinda the same notion. Interesting main character who I think has some strong acting, some strong supporting characters. Freddy is all menacing with really zero jokes, so not quite my favorite version of Freddy, but is different, so I guess it kind of balances out. He's trying to use our main character to come out into our world, so the rules don't quite add up sometimes in this film versus the original or the rest of the franchise, so this movie does kind of sit on its own branch at times. I do think the kills as well as practical effects are very solid. Although this movie does have some weird sequences at times, it's still a solid Nightmare film. Coming in at number 4, and this might be where I lose you, is Freddy vs. Jason. I totally get it if you think this film is trash, okay? I wouldn't show this movie to my sister or a random person on the street and expect them to love the early 2000-isms of this movie, but as a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, a Friday the 13th fan, this is an extremely good time for me. I remember hearing about this movie for years before it came out, and hell, before I even saw any of the films in either franchise, and so by the time it came out, I was familiar with the characters enough, I had seen enough films, but this is what made me fall in love with Freddy in particular. I don't love the water weakness to Jason, but this movie would be very hard to pull off today. Not really the best human characters, but it's got some great action, some so-so effects, but great kills, very satisfying, very easy for me to sit down and rewatch. Coming in at number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. This film I like more and more every time I watch it, and is a major leap over Freddy vs. Jason in terms of writing, kills, everything really. This is an all-time horror classic. The characters from top to bottom are top tier with not just acting but also casting. All of the characters have something to do and something unique to bring to the table in the dream world and in the real world. I think the level of cheese does get pushed a little too far for me at times in the dream world with the wizard chanting at Freddy, but other than a few times in the execution, the concept itself I really dig. The kills are my favorite out of the franchise, my favorite Freddy arguably executes the scares and the humor with the best balance, but still does go a little cheesy at times for me. Still a movie I absolutely love. Coming in at number 2 is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, one of my earliest horror watching experiences was watching Wes Craven films and Scream in particular. And New Nightmare in many ways was a precursor to Scream. I understand if that rubs some hardcore fans the wrong way, but as a big Scream fan, that's why I personally love it. Because Wes Craven comes back to tell the story about the actors who played in the franchise of A Nightmare on Elm Street as fictional versions of themselves, and how being in the franchise has affected them, how Freddy being a cartoon version of himself has damaged the franchise, and the power of a good story. Not to mention you have this 1,000-year-old demonic-like entity that manifests itself as Fred Krueger, calls people bitch, it walks like a duck, it acts like a duck, so to me, I do consider this a Fred Krueger. And this look isn't a particular fan favorite for the character, especially with the hat being too green, but as a more modernized look, I personally love it. I think it's terrifying. I don't prefer it over the original, but I do really like it, especially the eyes and the fleshy looking glove, but also how the fear was put back into this film after 3 not-so-great films, and Heather Langenkamp's best performance. You got Wes Craven and Robert Englund playing themselves in there. You have the twist where reality starts to become the universe from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Characters who were just friends are now father and daughter. Definitely not everybody else's favorite Nightmare film, but one of my all-time favorite slashers. Just very creative and inventive. It was a great way to reimagine it. But come on, you knew first place would be the original Nightmare on Elm Street. This wasn't the first horror film or slasher I saw in my life, so I had quite a few years with the Halloween and Scream franchises before I ever got into Nightmare. I had even seen a few of the Child's Play and Friday the 13th films before Nightmare, not sure why, but once I did, I knew what all the fuss about Freddy and Jason were, and to me, Freddy is a much more compelling, interesting, terrifying, and funny film icon than people give him credit for. This first film should not hold up today as well as it does. The makeup for Freddy is still one of the best designs. The concept for this film, as well as having a final girl who's not a damsel, who's fighting first movie like Sidney Prescott is, badass, and starts your franchise off very strong. An all-time great horror theme, all-time great horror director, all-time great horror cast, great characters. What else can I say? Great concept for a horror movie. Take out the last maybe minute of the film and you'd have one of the most satisfying endings, I think, as well. I want one more film, a final Nightmare, not a trilogy, just one film with Robert Englund, Heather Langenkamp while they're still alive. But there you have my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. If you're a DC fan, you can check out some of my DC rankings, or stay tuned. I do have more horror rankings coming up, Halloween. Make sure to comment down below your ranking. Just make sure to keep it friendly with each other. We are a small channel, so I would ask you to like and subscribe, as it really does help us more than you know. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.